Well, welcome to The Journey. My name is Kevin Polky, and I am the host of The Journey. And today we have a very special guest with us today. This is Jennifer Muraski, and she is the Winnebago County Coroner. And she is also going to be one of our guest speakers at the annual SOS or Shatter Our Silence fundraiser this year on September 21st. So, Jennifer, welcome to The Journey.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, well, when I first have someone on the show and a new guest on the show, I ask a question for the audience. When you have an opportunity to have fun or rejuvenate, be away from work, what do you do to have fun and rejuvenate?
I love to hang out with my family and my friends. That's big to me. I'm lucky enough to have access to a house. My in-laws have a house on Green Lake, Wisconsin, and it's one of my near and dear places to my heart. I grew up, my grandparents had a place on Green Lake, Wisconsin. And so to find a husband who also has a connection there, it's my place to be, recharge, reset, and especially when the family's there, it makes it great.
Well, I know a handful of families that have a place on Green Lake, and I have not been on Green Lake itself. I've gone to a wedding up there, and friends of ours, oldest son got married there, and so we happened to be there for that, but that was in the wintertime, and so didn't really get to experience it like I know that you get to, and these other
Right.
families do.
Yeah.
I'm in a very similar situation. My wife's parents bought a lake home in the late 80s, called Lake Redstone, and that is northwest of the Wisconsin Dells, about 30 minutes northwest of Wisconsin Dells, so only about little over 2 hours away. So it's a little bit west of Green Lake, and similar to yourself, that is definitely a place where can go and be able to recharge, be out in nature, and one of the benefits is that we don't get very good cell phone coverage,
Yeah. Right.
and it also helps with that as well. So.
Yeah. Yeah, for
So
sure.
maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you, you're the current Winnebago County Coroner, and you had actually stepped into that position a few years ago and then were reelected at the last election. But yeah, tell us a little bit about how did that all come about, and was this a lifelong desire or dream, or was this something that unfolded as your career unfolded?
Sure. So I was born and raised in Winnebago County. My father was a physician, retired now for Swedish American Hospital. My mom worked with it inside the home. I'm the youngest of 6 kids. We had over 120 foster infants in our house when we were growing up, which was quite an experience. I had an early exposure to the funeral business. I was very young, and I remember a class was going on a field trip to a funeral home, and I wasn't in that class, but I heard that they were going, and I knew I wanted to go, so I got permission to go on this field trip. I remember just walking around the funeral home and looking at where the room that the families made arrangements, and then the room that the funeral would take place, and down in the prep room where the embalming would take place, and the dressing and the casketing. And it stuck with me. It never left. And I would occasionally think about it as I went through middle school and high school. I got to college, and I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I always had that thing that just sat on my shoulder and said, I think you really need to try mortuary school. So I finished my prerequisite work, and then I headed to Worsham College of Mortuary Science, where I became a licensed funeral director and embalmer. Came back to Rockford, and I worked for Olson Funeral Home for 20 years. In that time, I started Muraski Monument Company. I did that for 10 years, while I was working at Olson's, and then I ended up leaving Olson's and started Adept Funeral Staffing Solutions, where I would be kind of like the traveling nurse, only I was the traveling funeral director and embalmer for Southern Illinois, or Northern Illinois, Southern Wisconsin funeral homes. But I had the opportunity to come run the coroner's office when things kind of went awry in this department. And I had thought about running in 2016 in that race, but my kids were younger and I just wasn't ready at that point. So when this all happened and the opportunity was before me, I knew I had to take it. I knew it was the right time. And since I've been in here, it is the absolute right thing for me.
Gotcha. So going back to that early experience when you were in school, and that first impression of visiting that funeral home, and then obviously, as they were showing the class around, what do you think about that experience kind of laid that impression on you? Well, you said it definitely laid some impression on you to that later was maybe this is the possibility of, but what aspect of it do you think of when you think back about that time period and how it's unfolded now?
I think honestly, at that young age, a lot of it was just curiosity. I think there was something about both anatomy and physiology that I was drawn to in the scholastic aspect of it. But I also the the people aspect of it. I had a kind of tumultuous upbringing a little bit. It was very chaotic, a lot of kids, and um, just to be able to, I think I would watch these funeral directors and their calm nature and there was no chaos involved. It was just calming and I thought it was great. And I think as I got older, not only my love for anatomy and physiology, but the taking care of the people in what is a chaotic time in their life, but learning how to be a calm, even healed person to them in their time of need, I think really drew me in that direction as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting for my sister-in-law, my wife's older sister, Delinda, works with Fitzgerald's Funeral Home, and
Mhm.
she had created a program with Fitzgerald's for an aftercare program. So it provides free grief services for the year. Up to a year after a significant other, a loved one dies, and I've had a similar conversation with her about how in her story that she was impacted by the death of um, their niece and nephew from a fire when they were, I think it was 2 and 4 years old, and how the family responded to that and really caused her to be uh, well, to find out that that was her calling. She's now a licensed clinical social worker, and she almost entirely does bereavement counseling, and splits her time with KP and with Fitzgerald's now. And again, it goes back to wanting to help people and in that time of need. And
Yeah.
so,
And she's wonderful, by the way. She is wonderful, and the families that deal with her are very lucky. I think we need more of that in our community. I lost a husband. I was 32 years old, and he was 37
mm,
to cancer, and we had hospice. He died within our home, and I had been a funeral director for quite a long time prior to him being diagnosed. And I had met with families and was managing the funeral homes. And uh, then I all of a sudden was on the other side of the arrangement table, so to speak.
mhm.
Um, and what I thought I was really good at my job, I learned so much from his journey and his passing and the dynamics of the family, good and bad, and my own family now, and I'm not just watching other people's families and helping them. I'm living it in my own families, and it taught me that I knew I had the answers of what I could do. So his name was Jody. So Jody's funeral, if somebody said to me, if you walked in that visitation and you didn't know Jody, you knew him when you walked out, because in 3 days I knew I could bring his Harley in and set it next to the casket, and I knew I could decorate the entire chapel with the things that he loved and hang things on the walls, and just everything I could do, we did. And so it made me realize that we as funeral professionals, or whatever you want to call it, we have a duty to do for these families that have one chance to get to celebrate the life of their loved one in a way that means the most to them, and we in a very short period of time, you know.
Yep.
So it changed the way I did my job,
Yeah.
and it really made me realize that it's my job to express to these families what is possible, what is capable, if in fact they want those things. Sometimes they don't, sometimes they do, and sometimes they're too scared to ask or embarrassed. So I realized that it was our job to let them know all the possibilities of what they can do, so that they're not walking away after it's all over saying, well, I wish I would have known I could have done this, or, you know. So it was very eye-opening to me.
Yeah, no, and I, it's interesting when you say that, because I think when we can do something from a, and do it really well, but when we are on, as you said, on the other side of the desk or on the other side of the table, if we're open, it will have a profound impact and expand our perception, and then very much has the possibility of us now moving forward doing things differently.
Yeah, absolutely. You bet.
So, so tell us a little bit, because I don't know if, our average listener actually knows what does the county coroner do, and what, obviously, there's probably maybe a better understanding of what a funeral director does. But what is it about? What does your office do, and to help our community? Yeah, tell us a little bit about, obviously partly about your job, but your office in general.
Sure. So first and foremost, the coroner's office is responsible for the cause and manner of the deaths in our county. Um, so, and there are 5 manners of death: homicide, suicide, accidental, undetermined, and natural. So we have a Winnebago County, we handle the coroner's office about 4,000 calls a year. There are 15 of us that work here. We are budgeted for 16. And so it's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week office where there are deputies staffed here, working and waiting to take calls. Not all of those calls come physically through our office, but we are hands-on with each, so to speak, whether it's taking the call of maybe a hospice case, recording that death has occurred in our county. And with hospice, that's probably the least amount of work that we do when it comes to a death in Winnebago County. But then it goes all the way up from, are we working with the doctor? Is there enough medical history that the doctor is going to be able to sign off on this person's cause of death? If there's not any medical history and there is no doctor that's willing to sign off, then it becomes a coroner's case where maybe that person isn't brought into our care, but the deputies are doing quite a bit of follow-up with family and any kind of previous medical history to come up with the cause of death. And then if we can't do any of that, that's when we talk about a potential autopsy happening, so we can really find out what happened to this individual, so that we can come up with a cause of death for them. Of course, if it's a homicide, suicide, not in every cases, but homicide, we're doing autopsies. So it just depends on the situation, decides how the deputies are handling the case. We do about 400 autopsies a year. So just about 10% are we doing autopsies. Of course, we see the death rate increases year after year, which means our investigations increase year after year. That's the main goal what we do here at the coroner's office. Now, what I do personally, I oversee all of that. I do a lot of office work as well, just to make sure that this office is running the way it's supposed to be running. And I have a chief deputy, Matt Lane, who works under me, and then we have 2 admin staff. We also have a community care coordinator. That's a new position. She right now, it's a grant funded position from the opioid grants. So right now she is working with our families that have been affected by opioid abuse and a loss. And she's reaching out to them in kind of an aftercare type situation.
Okay.
Which is important to me because we as deputy coroners and coroner and chief deputy, we work with the family quite a bit, but as time moves on, we're working with other families. And so we had this huge void where we weren't staying in contact with these families and these losses. And I knew we needed to be. So Cicely, that's her name, that is what she's doing right now with our families that have had loss due to opioid abuse. Now, moving forward, I hope that that moves into also homicide and suicide affected families.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, and I know, speaking of the homicide, I know, one of the times this year that we got to be in the same place was at the homicide annual banquet that we have, and we now have been doing it. It's moved a little bit, but this year we did it in May, and I definitely appreciate you being there. I know Sue Fiducia was a former Winnebago County Coroner. Whenever she's in town, she makes a point of coming every year.
Yeah.
And definitely appreciated you being there supporting those families, because to your point, especially in a homicide or suicide, and that's not to say death by accident, has the same kind of impact. Any type of traumatic death complicates that grieving process. But I think with a homicide, and then likewise with suicide, there are so many other variables that get put into it because of the court involvement, because of the violence of it, the abruptness of it, all the questions that come with that. And so anytime that we can allow the families to hear and see the support that people have, and there's a lot of times behind the scenes, right? They don't know all the different people that are involved with a particular, whether the death of their loved one, because they're just silently doing their job. And so those are always important. And I know the families appreciate, they tell us in the support group how much they appreciate you guys being there.
That's great. Well, it's sad and it's unfortunate, and it's life. And I know that I'm learning so much being here. I'm seeing so much and learning so much here in the coroner's office. Shocking to me, the age sometimes that we're seeing with suicide and even homicide these days, younger than I ever heard of growing up or remember happening. And it's very prevalent. When I'm hearing or seeing a 14-year-old who has taken his own life, or, young children that are being murdered, and, it's terrible. So whatever we can do as an organization, as a department, we are willing to jump in feet first, just so that we can help this community and help these families that are hurting when these things happen.
Well, we definitely appreciate that. And speaking of, I have been involved with this type of work, being involved with some either counseling or social work since 1990. And before that, I was involved with as a coach and personal trainer. So I've always been in that some form or fashion of helping profession. And it was interesting when I first got involved with more directly helping schools out with postvention. If a student died while they were, as an active student in a school, the impact, the ripple effect it had on the educators, on their peers, the other students. And then with my son graduating class had 3 of his classmates out of 100 from Rockford Christian that died. That was the beginning, kind of like the origin of why I started and reached out and had people help me start Shatter Our Silence. Of course, I didn't know. I mean, I've been impacted by it, going way back to my young adult years in college, but I didn't really know the statistics. I didn't know that it was the second leading cause of death, and there's more death by suicide than all the different illnesses that young adults are impacted by. Only accidents take more lives, and based upon the time of the year, or based upon the year, I should say, that sometimes it creeps up to the #1 cause of death in young adults. And so, what have you? When I look at the statistics that you have been, so helpful in getting to us, when we do our presentations to schools, there was a dip a few years ago during the pandemic. There was a dip in deaths by suicide, overall, but then also for young adults. And now that we're coming out of the pandemic, we're seeing that number increase again, back to pre-pandemic numbers. What have, from your observation, what seems to be that? What are you guys seeing at the office?
This is a hard one for me because in the short time that I've been here, the last couple of years, I am seeing it like this. And I don't, I wish I had a rhyme or a reason to it. I don't. What I do know is that, and we're at the infancy stage right now, but we're starting somewhere, is that we have this new case management system. And the reason why I used funding for this new case management system is for statistics. And I think with stats is so much knowledge. So one of the biggest questions that we're asked by families who have been affected by suicide is, were they on something? Were they drunk? Were they high? What were they thinking? Were they in their right state of mind? Were they altered state of mind? So it is very important for me that every single suicide we send toxicology on, and that we are keeping those stats so that moving forward, we can pull up, and not only the toxicology stats, but was this person a veteran? We're trying to pull all the information that we possibly can from the family, from what has been gained on the death certificate, all of those things. Did they graduate high school? All of those statistics, so that we can pull them together and try to maybe in the future get some commonalities or that can start helping us make sense to what's going on. Is it a prescription drug that we're seeing that's common in some of these youth suicides, or, so I don't know why it's happening. I don't know why we see the increase and the decrease and the ups and downs, but I've made it a goal of mine and a goal of this office to start gathering the information that we need to try to figure some of these things out.
Yeah. Well, and I know for me, as someone who has the good fortune and the opportunity to speak to students as well as educators and other professionals, as well as families, about how do we make, what can we do to prevent another suicide, and the more that we can have those statistics, and then piecing together some themes or some patterns that may be going on, then we can move toward putting energy toward those aspects of education.
Right. Exactly.
In a big part of when, for the longest time, individuals who talked about suicide prevention was directing it at the at-risk persons, the person who's in that darkness, and which I think is 100%, we need to do that. But we also know that there's a greater likelihood that when someone is struggling in that darkness, they're more likely to go to a peer than to a professional first. And so it's part of what we do is really directing not only to the at-risk person, but also to their friends, the average, the person who may not consider themselves at risk or would be in that spot, but we know that they're most likely their friend will come to them before they'll go to the teacher or go to their counselor. And so we want to, how do we educate them on what to do, not to minimize it, not to have any type of shaming comments, because we know that when someone is struggling and shares that they are feeling hopeless, they don't want to live anymore, may even use the word suicide, that is going to cause whoever they're talking to instantly put them into a fight or flight, and instantly they're going to be and understandably so, that would be a normal response to someone talking to them. How do they take a breath and go, okay, what can I do? How do I listen to what the person is saying? Because sometimes that person who's struggling in that darkness just wants to be heard.
Mhm.
And then and obviously then from that standpoint, getting them to a place of safety, either with somebody or at the hospital emergency room, or whatever it may be. But
Mhm.
I definitely agree, and I appreciate, I didn't realize that was the type of work that you guys were also doing, and I know that that will be extremely helpful for any type of educational efforts that we're doing. The more that we know, the more that we have to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree, and it's important. We have the ability in this office to gather those stats at a time that nobody else can, not the hospitals or anybody, in so many different cases and scenarios. So we're when you talk about overdoses. It's so important that we are toxing many of these people. Sometimes maybe if we already know a cause of death, but we see drugs on scene, but through autopsy, we know that there was a natural cause of death. Well, we're still going to draw tox on that one, because what if the drugs that were seen on the scene is some drug that we've never heard of before?
Mhm.
So we're the only ones that are going to be able to get that information out of this office. So it is important, and I'm excited is the wrong word, but I am pleased that we have the ability now and the capability to gather all of this information and hopefully do some good with it.
Yeah. Well, and I do think I think of all the endless possibilities with being able to being able to have horrific things that happen, to get a better idea of what may be able to tell the story, so that we can
Mhm.
use that information to hopefully prevent another tragedy from happening. And
Absolutely.
and obviously that is all those things, that information is then where do we strategically put energy and effort into um, you know uh, prevention, early intervention. We know that even with like the efforts that we do with the postventions, that after an incident happens, how we are able to intervene at that time period makes a big difference in the grieving process, as well as someone else that may very well be struggling, and instead of it tipping that person into a deeper despair, maybe it'll be a time where they can get some resources.
Right. And I don't know the exact statistics. You probably do, but when there's been a suicide in a family, the chances or the likelihood increases that there may be another suicide within that family. Same with drug use and drug abuse. Many times we're not it's a family affair. It's not just a lot of times one person, but we'll find that there are others within that family or within that household that also has an issue with use disorder. And so it's, how do we reach those people? in a preventative way to try to stop this from happening, because we at the coroner's office, being at the end of somebody's life, yes, it is what we do, but that is not all that we want to do. We want to take care of the community in hopes that we are not seeing some of these very tragic, horrific calls coming through our office. So if there's anything that we can do from our end, we're going to try to do that as well.
You know, I think, you know, with that, you know, we talk about when someone, you know, I talk a lot about we're all on a continuum, and that, you know, when I try to describe, I use a metaphor to describe that we all are on this continuum, and when we have thoughts of suicide, it's when our thoughts are at their darkest, and similar to the night, or similar to the moon eclipsing the sun. It appears that there is no hope or light at that time period. But it's the perception of the time, and how do we intervene when that eclipse is happening, when the absence of light is being perceived. And because we know that darkness, similar to addiction, we personify it when in counseling, say that it will lie to you. You know, when we're doing relapse, when we're doing recovery work or treatment for substance abuse, my director will talk to his clients about saying that the good idea fairy will come up with some kind of good idea on how it'll be okay for them to have a cocktail, or for them just to have, you know, one hit, and it'll start, you know, coming up with a scheme and a plan. Well, similar, depression in that darkness will also distort the truth and lie to you about saying that it'll never end. It's always going to be this way. People would be better off if you weren't here. You're a burden. All those things are things that goes through a person's mind. And we know this from individuals who have survived being in that darkness and shared. That's how intense the inner dialogue was.
Yeah.
And it's hard to combat. It takes a lot of effort and courage to combat that. And that's why we always believe that you can't do that alone. You need other people around you. You know, it's not about talking someone out of it. It's about holding space for them so that they can then see that, yes, the pain is tremendous at this moment, but it doesn't mean that the pain is permanent. So,
yeah. And how do you, I think that's the hardest part, as I work with Cicely, and she's working with the families that have been affected by use disorder and overdose. And, you know, I always say, I think there's windows in our life, and they open and then they close, and then they open and then they close. And how do we reach those families when they're ready to reach out or to accept resources that are out there, you know, because it's not always going to be the right time. So how do we make sure that we are where we need to be at the right time? I think that's the trickiest. That's what we struggle with here, especially with Cicely's a new position, is how do we be at the right place at the right time? So,
you know, what popped in my mind, because that is similar to what we, not only with the offices that I run, the counseling offices that I run, but also with Shatter Our Silence and with Four Corners, my educational company, is, you know, one is someone may be listening on a podcast, and they may be listening to an episode, and that may be the seed that gets planted. Or it may be something that gets posted on a social media post. That may be the seed that gets planted. And I'm always amazed that I would, of what someone may refer back to, you know, something that they read or heard me say or at some other time, and then go, you remember when you, and sometimes I don't remember but it wasn't for me necessarily to remember, it was for
Right,
that person to hear.
right.
So I think I think there is going to be those intentional times when she's doing those groups or making those calls, and then there's other times when it's going to be more of a broad planting of seeds, and in the consistency of planting those seeds, and the efforts that you're doing with the office now. It's the consistency of doing that is going to make the difference in the long run.
Yeah,
It probably will feel like at times that you're not making any movement at all, because that was the biggest thing that I learned with SOS is um, the there is no direct relationship, year after year. um, I shouldn't say that. I won't necessarily always see the impact that we make by the statistics that I get
right,
regarding death by suicide.
right.
And I would love for it to do educational efforts and then see it go to zero, year after year after year. Um, but I don't know. I can't. I have to use other things to measure if we're making impact than just that.
Yes. And that helps. That does help me as we move forward. That makes sense. And I think just pushing forward and the intentions that we have when we created this position, um, that it's going to make a difference, whether we can see it. But you're right, planting seeds and being there, another avenue. The more avenues we can create, the more resources within our community that we can put out there for all of these folks that are struggling and hurting, and the better. And even if
Yeah,
it comes from the coroner's office, just the better.
yeah.
So,
Well, and I think just the having our listeners hear what you're able to do and what your vision of what you want to be able to do with the access that you have, and how that can then, like in my case, that information will directly help influence educational efforts that we're bringing to the significant others and the adults, as well as the young adults that we're going to talk to. And so there is a direct link from with that.
but
I think it's hard though, and we found this out in many different efforts. It's hard to measure the impact of prevention. And I think that's why so many times the news will spend more energy, and media will spend more energy on reporting what's gone wrong
mhm,
than the stories of what's gone right.
right,
And I understand all that, but yes, it's doesn't mean that we need to stop our efforts.
right, correct. I'm
So
in full agreement with that.
yeah. So Jennifer, as we get ready to wrap up, what if no one, if someone needed to reach out to you and had a question, or just maybe someone is interested in knowing more about the coroner's office or had a question about something, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Well, two ways. They can call the office at 815-319-4970. And I'm here all the time, and the deputies are here all the time. We are very accessible as far, well, it might not be easy to get to us, but you can come up here, you can visit, you can stop in. We're on the second floor of the old courthouse at 403 Elm. We have visitors and people here daily. So I want, whether it's families or whether it's young folks that are interested in getting into this type of field, whatever it may be, we have an open door policy here. So we're always staffed. I welcome anybody who wants to stop in or wants to call, wants a tour. Maybe there are families that just can't get over what it might look like for their loved one to have been in the Winnebago County morgue. I If it's something that's going to help on their journey, then I am wide open to those types of things. This is, I would rather that families see what's actually here than make it up in their mind. I've seen a lot of that and heard of a lot of that. And so we're just here for whatever somebody may need, so you can always find us.
Well, Jennifer, I really appreciate you being on the journey today. I appreciate you being willing to be one of the speakers on the 21st of September, and you sharing a little bit about your vision of how you want to utilize what your office can do for the community. It was very inspiring and refreshing to hear. So again, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for what you do.
Thanks. If for some reason, as you were listening to Jennifer and I have a conversation today, if for some reason that brought up either a question for you to reach out to Jennifer's office, or if it triggered some type of thought and you need some type of assistance, or someone needs some assistance, always make sure that you contact 988 either by calling or by texting, and that's the suicide hotline. Or if it's more imminent, please don't wait. Definitely contact 911 to get to a safe place. As always, thank you for being here, and I look forward to being with you next week.